Okay, everyone, welcome to our first flipped classroom recorded lecture. And for today, we'll be conducting the lecture on running Riot. We would be looking at a progression of events whereby we would be looking at different riots, different case studies that occurred. So, in total, we would be looking at 3 case studies today, but more of that later. Now, before that, let us look at where we have left off in term 1. At the end of term 1, we looked at the end of the Japanese occupation. And to those of you, you should know that the end of the war in Asia was precipitated by the drop of the atomic bomb by the American troops in Japan. Now, we need to understand that, however, it did not mean that all problems were solved, because as we have looked at, we have realized that there were problems like unemployment, shortage of housing. These were mainly problems that occurred during the post-war period. However, we need to understand that new problems came about as well. And one of the problems, in a sense, we would be analyzing today would be riots. We would analyze it and use it as an indicator of some of the problems faced in society at that point of time, because we would realize that there was a prevalence of it during that era. Through this, we need to have a good understanding of what and how it happened, and this would be useful for us because it would ensure us to realize that we should not let it happen again. Because if we see the recent turn of events, could history be in danger of repeating itself? So today we would be looking at 3 case studies. We would be looking at the Maria Hertog riots, the anti-national service riots, and also the Hockley bus riots. Okay, let's look at the first riot, the first case study, okay? The Hockley bus riot. In 1955, large numbers of Chinese school students supported many strikes organized by the communists. In fact, there were close to 300 strikes in 1955. One strike that turned violent was the Hockley bus strike. Thousands of Chinese educated school students supported a strike by workers from the Hockley Bus Company. From late April to early May, workers supported by the students demanded better employment conditions such as higher salaries. Now, when the union and the bus company failed to reach an agreement, tension between the strikers, bus company, and the police increased. On 12 May, a riot erupted when mobs of up to 1,000 attacked the police. During the night, the riots turned more violent and left 4 dead and 31 injured. Over the next 2 days, almost all bus workers in Singapore went on strike. People lived in an atmosphere of fear and tension. After the riots, some Chinese students were arrested, and the government threatened to close the schools involved in the riots. In response to this, students camped at Chung Cheng High School and demanded the students' release. Now, let us look at some of the factors leading to this particular riot. We have seen how there were communist instigators that probably influenced people to start rioting, but at the same time, we need to realize the underlying theme of the problem. We realized that the workers were poorly paid, and basically there was a general resentment amongst the Chinese population at that point of time. Now, what exactly is this general resentment? Well, we need to realize that there was economic, but at the same time, unhappiness related to their well-being. Now, this resentment can be better illustrated from the anti-national service riots. Okay, so for the anti-national service riot, the communists again stirred up anti-government feelings among Chinese educated students whenever they could. For example, in May 1954, students at a number of Chinese schools demonstrated against the British government's decision to make young men aged around between 18 and 20 to do part-time military service. Now, many of the secondary school students were 20 years old and above, because their education was disrupted by the war. Furthermore, the students were not willing to defend a foreign government which they wanted to drive out of Singapore in the first place. So all this demonstration led to rioting, and the police had to put down the riots. Now, the British government did not provide for Chinese schools, and when it came to economic opportunities, the colonial government also preferred the English educated, leaving the Chinese educated dissatisfied. The Chinese schools in Singapore had a strong China inclination as well. So when China became a communist country, communism had a strong influence on the Chinese educated community. But that's the problem, you see, because this national service ruling angered the Chinese students because they were forced, in fact, to defend the same British government that had discriminated against them and in which they saw no future in defending. So largely, the Chinese who felt that they were not treated as equals by the British did not feel obliged to serve the colonial government. Moreover, this disruption to education in Chinese schools caused much displeasure within the Chinese community, feeling resentment towards the inequality and biasness. Okay, so think about it. You're in school and the government forces you to do national service, disrupting your education. Would you be happy? In fact, would you be happy when you know that this government was actually biased against you? So from these two case studies, we need to avoid having a tendency to only blame it on communism and the instigators as well. Because we need to have an awareness that these riots could have occurred due to a culmination of other factors instead. So instead of just simply having a superficial understanding, whereby you think that the riots occurred because of communism, think about it. Think about the economic factors behind it. Think about the well-being factors, the well-being of the people at a point of time as well. Because if you really think about it, these writers really care about the fight for communism. They truly understand what communism was all about. Or were they simply protesting against the injustices they face? And apparently they found an ally in communism. Okay, so let us refer this to something more relevant, something more contemporary, whereby we are aware of the bus driver strike that happened sometime last year. So when we are looking at causes of a strike, we need to look at the various factors and not just simply the superficial factor. What are some of the underlying problems? What are some of the reasons, factors hidden beneath the superficial reasons? At the same time, we need to realize that apart from communism, apart from unhappiness due to economic reasons, we need to understand that Singapore is a multiracial religious society even back then. And this is something that should be proud of, even though this is something that we should not ever take for granted. In December 1950, riots broke out between 11 and 13 December over a 13-year-old Eurasian girl called Maria Hertog. Now, when Japan invaded Java, or what is presently known as Indonesia, in 1942, her parents were captured and imprisoned by the Japanese. That year, a Malay woman called Cik Aminah and her Indonesian husband looked after Maria. They brought her up as a Muslim and named her Nadra. Later, they moved from Java to Terengganu in Malaya. So, in 1945, when the Japanese were defeated, Maria's mother was released. However, she was not able to locate her daughter in Java, and it was only made known in 1949 that Maria was discovered in Malaya and her mother wanted to claim her daughter back. So, what happened was the Dutch Consul General requested that Maria should be put under the care of the Social Welfare Department in Singapore, and Maria's case would be brought up to the legal court. Now, this led to even more problems. In May 1950, the court ruled that Maria had to be returned to her natural parents. Cik Aminah clearly opposed this decision and sent in an appeal. While the court was deciding what to do about Maria, she was sent to a girls' center. Now, 2 months later, the court actually returned Maria to Cik Aminah. So, when Maria was 13 years old and under Cik Aminah's care, she married a Malay teacher. When court hearings began again, the judge announced that the British law did not recognize Maria as married. This was because she was underage and her natural father's consent had not been obtained. The court returned Maria to her Dutch parents, who placed Maria in a Roman Catholic convent. the Muslim community was clearly upset by what had happened. They felt that Muslim law had not been respected or considered. So for the next 2 months, the Malay and English newspapers carried articles about Maria being kept in the convent. This stirred up feelings of anger among the Muslims. Sheikh Aminah appealed again in December for the custody of Maria, but this was dismissed. Again, many Singapore Muslims felt betrayed by what they saw as the British taking the side of the Dutch. After the verdict was announced on 11 December, a large crowd of Malays, which had been waiting at the padang outside the court, started rioting. So, during the Maria Hertog riots, many Europeans were attacked as it was believed that they were responsible for Maria's plight. Many vehicles were also burnt. It was perhaps at the same time a sign of the growing unhappiness with British rule in Singapore and with the failure of the British to be sensitive to the feelings of the Muslims. Now, the period after the war was a very difficult time for Singapore as it struggled to recover economically from the war. Singapore was vulnerable to influences such as communism as well. Apart from disturbances that was created by the communists, we also have problems of religious and racial differences or a lack of sensitivity towards it that ultimately led to a riot. Now, we need to have an overall view after looking at the three different case studies. We have seen that for the case of Maria Hertog, there was a lack of respect for the religion. But at the same time, we need to ask ourselves, was the news sensationalized? Did the papers, did the media have something to do with it to stoke the anger of other people as well? At the same time, we need to realize that riots are not simply just a product of communism, and at the same time, could it be a reflection of the unhappiness towards British rule? So there we have it. We have looked at three different case studies and we need to understand the roots of the riots so that we are able to realize the hidden perspectives and angles we have seen through the Maria Hertog case, religious differences, anti-national service riots, Hockley bus riots. Yes, communism played a factor, but was it the only factor? Therefore, it is important for us to realize that there are certain factors, certain learnings that are buried in the sense of time, and if this continues to happen, could we find ourselves unknowingly repeating the mistakes of the past? So therefore, in conclusion, you need to be aware of the various factors that led to the riots. You also need to be aware of the interconnections between factors. It is not enough to simply see communism by itself. You need to realize how communism and other factors interlinked, interrelated, thus leading to the various riots. Okay, so once you're done watching this video, you are required to supplement your understanding with the related readings in your course pack.